Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Megillah. We are up to Perek Bet, Mishnah Bet. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'elu Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Aranbayev, and Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Menuchatam beGan Eden, Amen, and Le'avdi ben Chaim L'Chaim, v'Refuah Shelemav, Daniel Shalom ben Rosa, B'tor Shar Cholei Israel. The Mishnah begins, Kira'ah Serugin, Ubitnamnem Yatsa. If one read the Megillah in parts, meaning he read part of it, stopped, and then continued, or when he was half asleep, he has fulfilled his obligation. And the commentaries explain, mitnamnem, half asleep, is the state in which one is neither fully awake nor fully asleep. If someone calls him, he will answer, but he cannot give an answer that requires thought. If he is reminded of something that he knows, he will recall. This is how the Gemara explains mitnamnem on page 18b in Masechet Megillah. Even in such a state, a person's intent can be clear enough to enable him to fulfill his obligation. As the Mishnah Berurah writes in Orach Chaim chapter 690, Sivkat and 39. Haya kotvah dorshah u'magiyah. If he was writing a Megillah, meaning as he was copying from another Megillah, he read each verse before he wrote it. Now the Megillah he is copying from must be complete, because a person can fulfill his obligation only by reading from a complete Megillah. So again, if he was writing a Megillah, explaining it or correcting it, and in the course of his work, he read the whole Megillah, the law is as follows. Im kiven libo yatsa. If he intended to perform the mitzvah with his reading, he has fulfilled his obligation. Ve'im lav lo yatsa. But if he did not have such intent, he has not fulfilled his obligation. This law is based on the rule of mitzvot sichot kavanah. Mitzvot require intent, which means that a person does not fulfill a mitzvah unless he intends to do so. It is not enough to do the mitzvah. He must also have intent to fulfill it. Therefore, in our case, even though this person read the entire Megillah, it does not count as a mitzvah unless he intended to fulfill the mitzvah with this reading. And the Mishnah discusses which materials may be used to write a Megillah. Haita kituva bisam uvsikra uvkomos uvkankantom. If it was written with a yellow dye, a red dye, a tree sap, or an iron salt, really the words that the elucidator writes is an orpiment, which is the yellow dye, vermilion, which is a red dye, gum arabic, which is tree sap, or ferrous sulfate, which is an iron salt, al niyar val diftera, or if it was written on paper or on unfinished parchment, lo yatsa, one who reads from such a Megillah has not fulfilled his obligation. Ad shetiyeh ketuvah shurit ala sefer ubidyo. A Megillah cannot be used for the mitzvah unless it is written in ashurit, the Hebrew script, on parchment and in black ink. Now, in fact, we learned earlier, Megillah may be written in any language and script. The Mishnah states Ashurit because only a Megillah written in Hebrew in the Ashurit script can be used for everyone, even those who do not understand Hebrew. A Megillah written in another language is valid only for those who understand that language, like we learned in the previous Mishnah. And again, the Mishnah says in black ink, which Tiferet explains, black ink that keeps its color when written on parchment is what the Mishnah is referring to. And that is in Rabotai of Mishnah Bet. Now, as we discussed in the introduction to chapter 1 of the article elucidated, the Megillah is read in unwalled cities on the 14th of Adar and in walled cities on the 15th of Adar. This Mishnah, Mishnah Gimel, states the rule for a person who lives in one type of place but spends Purim in the other. Ben ir shalach lichrach uben karach shalach le'ir. If a person who lives in an unwalled town went to a walled city, or a person who lives in a walled city went to an unwalled town, the law is as follows. Im atid lachazor limkomo koreb kimkomo. If he will return to his hometown before dawn on Purim morning, meaning the Purim of the place he is visiting, he reads the Megillah on the same day as in his hometown. Ve'im lav korei ma'en. But if he does not leave the place he is visiting until after dawn, he reads the Megillah together with them, the residents of the place he is visiting. Now, although we read the Megillah twice, once at night and once in the daytime reading is the main one. Therefore, a person's status is determined by where he is at daybreak when its obligation begins, regardless of where he was on Purim night. Now, there are two different categories here. A walled city resident who went to an unwalled town. If a person from a walled city visits an unwalled town, his halachic status depends on where he will be at daybreak on its Purim, the 14th of Adar. If he will return home before daybreak on the 14th, he does not read the Megillah with the people of the unwalled town, even at night when he is still there. Rather, he reads it on the 15th as usual. And if he will be in the unwalled town at daybreak on the 14th, he is considered an unwalled town resident with respect to the Megillah, and therefore he reads the Megillah on the 14th. The second category is an unwalled town resident who went to a walled city. If a person from an unwalled town went to a walled city, his halachic status depends on where he will be at daybreak on its Purim, the 15th of Adar. If he will return home before daybreak on the 15th, he remains subject to the laws of unwalled town residents. Therefore, he reads the Megillah on the 14th, even though he is in a walled city that day. If he will stay in the walled city until daybreak on the 15th, he is considered a walled city resident in this matter, and therefore he waits until the 15th to read the Megillah. The Mishnah now cites a dispute as to whether it is necessary to read the Megillah from the beginning. From where in the Megillah must one read in order to fulfill his obligation? Rabbi Meir says that kula. Rabbi Meir says that one must read all of it. Rabbi Yehuda says Me'ish Yehudi. It suffices to begin from the verse there was a Jewish man, etc., which is chapter 2, verse 5 of Megillat Esther. Rabbi Yossi says Me'achar advarim ha'ele. It suffices to begin from the verse after these matters, etc., which is in chapter 3, verse 1 of Megillat Esther. The Megillah states Queen Esther and Mordechai the Jew wrote all the power to ratify this letter of Purim. The Gemara derives from this verse that when reading this letter of Purim, the Megillah, we must read about the power. These Tanaim disagree as to whose power the verse refers. According to Rabbi Meir, it refers to the power of Achashverosh. He therefore rules that we must read the Megillah from the beginning, since Achashverosh's power is mentioned from the beginning of the Megillah to the end. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it refers to the power of Mordechai. Therefore, we fulfill our obligation if we begin at chapter 2, verse 5, which introduces Mordechai and his greatness. According to Rabbi Yossi, it refers to the power of Haman, so it suffices to begin from chapter 3, verse 1, which describes Haman's rise to power. All agree that one must read to the end of the Megillah from wherever they say to begin. The Rab does tell us, the Halacha follows the opinion of Rabbi Meir, that one must read all of the Megillah in order to fulfill his obligation from beginning to end. And that is Rabbi Taif today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.